August 12, 1942. Motor Torpedo Boat Base, Tulagi Harbor, Solomon Islands. The radio operator hurriedly transcribed an urgent message arriving from Henderson Field. A Japanese destroyer force had been detected moving southeast through the narrow passage known as the Slot. Multiple vessels were heading that way, expected to reach Iron Bottom Sound in the early hours. Lieutenant Hugh Robinson, one of the first PT boat commanders in the Solomon Islands, studied the reconnaissance report carefully. For small boats were to face an unknown number of Japanese destroyers, ships that had ruled these waters since the war began. What none of them yet realized was that these 77-foot plywood boats were about to initiate a campaign of nighttime harassment that would force the Imperial Japanese Navy to rethink its supply strategy in the Solomon Islands. For years, Japan had dominated the night waters around Guadalcanal. Since the American landings in August 1942, Japanese destroyers had ferried supplies and reinforcements down the Slot, the narrow passage threading through the central Solomons, almost without opposition. The Americans had nicknamed these runs the Tokyo Express. They were the lifeline keeping Japanese troops on Guadalcanal alive. Japanese mastery of night combat had been demonstrated catastrophically at Savo Island that same month, where Japanese cruisers had sunk 4 Allied heavy cruisers in just 32 minutes. Their Type 93 long lance torpedoes could strike targets at over 20,000 yards, and crews had trained for years to excel in darkness. Optical instruments, trained lookouts, and years of preparation made them deadly, while early American radar often struggled to detect them. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's strategy was clear: control the night, control the supply lines, and maintain the garrison. The Americans could dominate the daylight skies with aircraft from Henderson Field, but the night belonged to Japan. Without these nocturnal supply runs, the 30,000 Japanese troops on Guadalcanal would have starved within weeks. Enter the PT boats. American industrial ingenuity pushed to practical limits. Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 2 had arrived at Tulagi with the first of these small, fast vessels in August 1942. Each Elco 77-foot boat displaced just 45 tons, with a beam of 20 feet and a draft of 5 feet, shallow enough to operate where destroyers could not follow. Lieutenant Roland Westholm, commanding one of the early boats, inspected the vessel's armament as twilight faded. 2 twin 50 caliber machine gun turrets, and 4 21-inch torpedo tubes carrying Mark 8 torpedoes, weapons that suffered from a 50% failure rate due to defective magnetic detonators and depth-setting issues. The boats carried no radar initially, relying solely on eyesight and hearing for detection. But their true weapon was speed. 3 Packard 4M 2,512-cylinder engines, each generating 1,350 horsepower, could push the boats to a maximum of 41 knots, though 35 knots was more realistic in combat. Japanese destroyers could barely reach that speed, and in the confined waters around Guadalcanal, speed meant survival. The PT boat hulls were revolutionary. 2 layers of mahogany planking formed a flexible shell that absorbed impacts that would crack steel plates. Each boat could be built in just 2 months at a cost of $263,000, compared to a destroyer, which required 18 months and $8 million. Motor Machinist's Mate, First Class Eldon C. Genter, who had spent 8 months learning every sound the Packard engines could make, could diagnose problems by ear alone. A Detroit mechanic from the Packard production line, he had modified carburetor settings for the humidity of the Solomon Islands and developed pre-combat engine checklists to ensure the boats could operate at peak performance. On the Japanese side, Commander Kiyoshi Kaneda led 3 Fubuki-class destroyers down the slot at 28 knots. 20 years in the Imperial Navy had taught him to read the waters. Every shadow might conceal an enemy, every phosphorescent trail could mark a torpedo's path. His mission was to deliver 800 drums of supplies to the garrison at Cape Esperance, a difficult task with only about 30% of the cargo typically reaching shore. October 13, 1942. 4 PT boats from Squadron 2 lay in the shadows of Savo Island, engines muffled, moving at minimum RPM to reduce noise and the glowing wake in the water. No radio communication, only hand signals and shielded blinker lights. Lieutenant Lester Gamble, in PT 48, led the patrol line. The boats spread out, keeping careful watch. Without radar, crews relied on what they called the Mark I eyeball, human vision adapted to darkness after hours without artificial light. Soon, Lookout spotted shadows on the horizon, 3 destroyers moving in column formation, making 25 knots toward Cape Esperance. The PT attack doctrine usually called for multiple approach angles to divide enemy fire. With only 4 boats and unreliable torpedoes, Gamble decided to concentrate. All boats would attack from the destroyer's starboard quarter, fire torpedoes at 500 yards, then scatter at full throttle. PT 48 led the approach. Engines throttled at first, then surged forward as the boat leapt to 35 knots. Gamble fired 2 torpedoes, leading the target slightly. Visible wakes of bubbles immediately alerted Japanese lookouts. "Gyrai! Gyrai! Torpedoes!" they shouted. The destroyer's helmsman veered sharply. Both torpedoes passed behind the target, missing by mere yards. Star shells burst overhead, illuminating the PT boats as 5-inch guns fountained water around PT 48. Gamble zigzagged violently at full speed. PT 46 attacked next, closing in before firing. 1 torpedo ran erratically and missed, while the other failed to detonate, problems that plagued PT boats throughout the war. Although no ships were sunk, the attacks forced Japanese destroyers to jettison supplies prematurely. Minimal cargo reached shore, signaling the first evidence that PT boats could disrupt supply operations even without confirmed kills. The disruptions convinced Admiral William Halsey to reinforce PT operations. By November 1942, 12 PT boats operated from Tulagi, employing new tactics developed from hard-won experience. Intelligence revealed the Tokyo Express schedule, runs every 3 to 5 nights, 4 to 8 destroyers per run, along predictable routes. Lieutenant Commander Thomas G. Warfield developed new tactical doctrine. PT boats would operate in groups of 3. One fired torpedoes while the others created diversions with gunfire. Even when torpedoes failed, evasive maneuvers forced Japanese destroyers to scatter supplies inefficiently. Following the surface actions where American cruisers had suffered defeats at the hands of Japanese destroyers, PT boats became a critical element of the broader interdiction effort. While they could not match the firepower of destroyers, their harassment tactics forced the Japanese to alter their operations. PT boats patrolled the approaches to Cape Esperance, attacking supply destroyers whenever possible. Even though most torpedo attacks failed, the persistent threat compelled Japanese commanders to maintain high speeds, continuously zigzag, and jettison supplies hastily, reducing delivery efficiency to below 20%. During the largest supply run to date, 11 Japanese destroyers approached Guadalcanal. PT boats scrambled to intercept, firing over 30 torpedoes, yet none struck confirmed targets, highlighting the reliability issues of their primary weapon. Still, the psychological effect was profound. Japanese reports noted that motor torpedo boats made night operations extremely hazardous, requiring constant vigilance. PT-59 achieved one of the few confirmed kills, sinking the Japanese submarine I-3 as it attempted a supply mission. This demonstrated that PT boats could indeed be effective against slower, less maneuverable targets. Admiral Reizo Tanaka, Japan's most skilled destroyer commander, personally led the next supply run. His flagship, the new Akizuki-class destroyer Teruzuki, was equipped with advanced fire control systems and rapid-fire guns. 10 additional destroyers accompanied him, 6 carrying supplies in drums. At night, PT boats from Squadron 2 detected the Japanese formation off Cape Esperance. Tanaka had anticipated possible attacks, positioning Teruzuki as the rear guard while supply destroyers moved inshore. PT-37 under Lieutenant Lester Gamble, PT-40 under Lieutenant John Searles, and PT-48 coordinated their approach. These were tactics honed over months of combat: divide the enemy's attention, create confusion, and exploit openings. At close range, one or more PT boats fired torpedoes at Teruzuki. At least one Mark 8 torpedo struck the destroyer's port quarter, detonating near the steering compartment. The explosion damaged Teruzuki's rudder and propeller shaft, reducing her speed dramatically. Oil from ruptured fuel tanks ignited, illuminating the ship for miles. Admiral Tanaka was injured and temporarily relieved of command for medical treatment. Destroyer Naganami came alongside to evacuate the wounded, while the entire Japanese formation lingered in confusion. Supplies were jettisoned prematurely, further undermining the mission. Later, at dawn, Teruzuki's depth charges detonated from the heat of the fires, breaking the ship's back and sending her to the bottom of Iron Bottom Sound. She became the largest Japanese warship definitively sunk by PT boats during World War II. Though PT boats would not sink another Japanese destroyer, their cumulative impact on Japanese operations was undeniable. The constant harassment, combined with airstrikes and surface actions, made traditional destroyer supply runs increasingly untenable. By January 1943, the Tokyo Express shifted to submarines and barges, methods far less efficient than destroyer runs. PT boat operations demonstrated a new paradigm in naval warfare, where multiple interdependent weapon systems, each vulnerable on its own, could collectively neutralize traditional advantages. PT boats alone rarely sank major warships, but as part of a coordinated effort, they contributed significantly to strategic victories. From an industrial perspective, PT boats were remarkably efficient. The United States built 531 during the war, each in just 2 months, costing 1/30th of a destroyer. Despite losses, 69 from all causes, they offered a cost-effective means to disrupt enemy operations. Training programs in Melville, Rhode Island, prepared over 1,000 officers and 10,000 enlisted men in just 8 weeks, creating crews capable of navigating, maintaining engines, and engaging in combat under extreme conditions. By mid-1943, radar improvements allowed detection at 15 miles, and the Mark 13 torpedo increased reliability significantly. These innovations made PT boats more effective, though their primary mission remained harassment and interdiction of smaller vessels. Japanese countermeasures, destroyer escorts and flares from float planes, met with limited success. Submarine supply runs could deliver only a fraction of the tonnage required. Armored barges became the primary target, where PT boats achieved their greatest successes against maritime logistics. Service in PT boats attracted young volunteers, often only 22 years old, many inexperienced at sea. Living conditions were harsh: no heads, primitive rations, sleeping on deck when possible. Tropical diseases affected 80% of crews, and casualty rates reached 33%, higher than any other naval service. Yet morale remained high. Crews developed strong cohesion, taking extraordinary risks while knowing their actions could shape the course of the war. Lieutenant John F. Kennedy's PT-109 exemplified both the dangers and heroism of PT boat service. On August 2, 1943, PT-109 collided with the destroyer Amagiri during a night operation. Kennedy's leadership in saving his crew became legendary, illustrating the extreme hazards these small boats faced. Post-war analysis confirmed that PT boats' greatest contribution was not the ships they sank but the cumulative disruption they caused. By forcing Japanese forces to adopt increasingly inefficient supply methods, shifting from destroyers to submarines to barges, the Americans achieved tactical victories through attrition. Modern fast attack craft evolved from these concepts, emphasizing speed, surprise, and combined operations. In the waters around Guadalcanal, 77-foot plywood boats proved that integrated naval operations could overcome traditional superiority. PT boats alone could not defeat the Tokyo Express, but combined with air power, submarines, and surface forces, they inflicted attrition that proved strategically decisive. The Japanese Navy, confident in its night combat supremacy, had not anticipated the effectiveness of multiple interdependent systems. Commander Tomichi Hara, who survived several encounters, later wrote that PT boats taught the necessity of adapting to unconventional threats. They rarely hit, but they never let the enemy rest. The final accounting was significant. 1 destroyer sunk, 1 submarine destroyed, hundreds of supply runs disrupted, thousands of tons of cargo lost. The cumulative effect contributed decisively to Japanese defeat at Guadalcanal. In Iron Bottom Sound, Teruzuki rests in 800 feet of water. The only major Japanese warship definitively sunk by PT boats. Discovered in 2024, her wreck stands as a monument to the young men who fought in small wooden boats against steel warships, proving that courage, persistence, and ingenuity could influence strategic outcomes even when tactical success was limited. The Mosquito boats demonstrated that future naval warfare would require integrated operations, technological adaptation, and recognition that even small combatants, when employed strategically, could contribute to decisive victory.